Welcome, welcome. I am Dr. Jess Roberts. I am the Director of Habitat Connectivity here at Wild Virginia. Thank you so much for being here. We have a really wonderful schedule and wonderful speakers. Just a few things before we really get started. This is being recorded, so we will be recording this entire session and it will be posted on Wild Virginia's YouTube channel, so just be aware of that. We will also be providing that recording in a follow-up email afterwards. Also, during this session, we will have a few Q&As, and if you have any questions at any time during the webinar, please put them in the Q&A section of the webinar. Again, at any time during the webinar, you can put your question in there. That's how we keep track of your questions. And at the end, we will have a Q&A section where we can answer all those questions for you. So again, at any time, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A section, not in the chat if you can. That would be really wonderful. Okay. And we also have a really wonderful one-pager for you that outlines a lot of the topics that we're going to be talking about tonight. So this is a resource for you to use. It also links to our other VCN, Virginia Conservation Network, briefing paper. So it goes a little bit more in depth about all the topics we're going to talk about tonight. So we will provide that in the chat for you. We're also going to provide that in the follow-up email as well. Awesome. Thank you, Kylie. So that one pager is in the chat for you. So again, before we go into the topic, we just have a brief introduction to Wild Virginia, and we're going to hear from Wild Virginia's, I don't know why this is not working. There we go. Wild Virginia's board member, Greta. So Greta, take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. I'm so excited you're here, excited about this evening. Wild Virginia is a leading edge, small but mighty conservation group in Virginia who has been leading, along with the presenters tonight, for a number of years, a terrific effort for trying to promote wildlife crossings and corridors in the state of Virginia. As you can see from the screen that Jessica has posted, we have a number of activities that we do. And again, we're really leading edge. We pave the way and that others follow. So this evening, we're going to be educating you and asking for your advocacy support over the next few months. And if you can find it in your hearts as well to perhaps provide a donation along the way, that would be terrific. Because we are such a leading edge group, we suffer some of the same issues that the state of Virginia is right now in trying to get together funding for the wildlife corridors. We are so in advance of our potential funders that it's hard for us sometimes to get funding. So if you can break loose a few dollars and help us out, that'd be great. Because it will make a difference, and you will know that your money and your time this evening will make a difference in wildlife crossings. So thanks so much again for being here. And Jessica, back to you.
Thank you, Greta. That was awesome. Okay, real fast, we're going to go over some brief definitions. And before I do that, I wanted to let you know we do have a poll. So Kylie is going to launch that poll right now with some 3 basic questions about habitat connectivity. So please, at any time during this webinar, answer this poll, and we will talk about the answers at the end of the webinar. Thank you so much. Okay, so some basic definitions. So we're going to be talking a lot about habitat connectivity today. And what does that mean? So habitat connectivity is the degree to which landscape facilitates or impedes wildlife movement or other ecological processes. So we're going to be talking a lot about roads and driver safety today, but it's also important to note that a lot of the conservation work that we do to connect habitats, we really want to also protect biodiversity. So due to climate change, wildlife is going to need to move in the future due to differing climates that we're going to experience, but also currently they need to be able to move between habitats to find resources, mates, all things that help them create robust populations. So we want to look at it also from that biodiversity perspective. What is a crossing? So we're going to say road crossing a bunch today, wildlife crossing. All that is what we're talking about is an underpass or an overpass over a road that allowed safe wildlife movement below or over to access habitat. So this is both for terrestrial and aquatic species. A corridor is an intact habitat that allows safe wildlife movement between habitats. So both of these, as you can see from the Center for Large Landscape Conservation, their lovely graphic, is two ways that we can increase habitat connectivity in the face of human development, especially roads, which are known to be real barriers to wildlife movement. And wildlife vehicle conflict. So we're going to say conflict a lot because what this means, it's any adverse accident with a moving vehicle and wildlife as the main cause. So this could include a car coming in direct contact with wildlife and causing a crash, or it could also include a driver swerving and getting into a crash. So that's why we use the term conflict, because it means both of those things, which are both equally dangerous and destructive. All right, it looks like we might not have our Senator Marsden here currently. So we are going to skip this section and we will come back whenever Senator Marsden arrives. So I'm going to go a little bit more in depth into this topic. So Virginia is currently top 10 in the nation for wildlife vehicle conflict. So the map you're seeing right here, the darker states are ones that are top in the nation for wildlife vehicle conflict. So we are top 10, and actually West Virginia, our neighbor, is #1 in the nation for wildlife vehicle conflict. In 2022, with a really staggering number, over 80,000 crashes with wildlife were reported. Deer collisions make up about 60,000 of those, so pretty staggering. Each deer collision is estimated to be $41,000 in state and personal costs. This is an estimate from our amazing Virginia Transportation Research Council. A lot of the research we're going to be talking about today comes from them, and they are just an amazing resource for wildlife fuel conflict mitigation. So yes, pretty high cost on average for a deer collision. Black bear collisions are on the rise because we have rising black bear populations, which is great, but this also means that they're going to be coming in more conflict with cars. And then we do have a reintroduced elk population in Southwest Virginia, and that's estimated to be about double what a deer collision is, about 80,000 in state and personal costs. So a pretty serious issue for the state of Virginia in terms of costs and lives. Now, what do we do about this? So again, our wonderful Virginia Transportation Research Council does a lot of great wildlife fuel conflict mitigation work. And so this is actually a study where they put up fencing on I-64 right outside of Charlottesville that connects two existing underpasses. So they put about 1 mile of exclusionary fencing to funnel wildlife to use these underpasses. And they wanted to see how effective an underpass plus exclusionary fencing would be at mitigating this issue. So this is one of the trail cameras that comes from the Virginia Transportation Research Council. And as you can see, after exclusionary fencing, we had a bear use one of those existing underpasses. So the data that came out of this showed that after fencing, deer crashes were reduced by over 96%, so almost 100% effective at reducing deer vehicle conflict at this site. And the crashes did not increase at the 1 mile fence ends, which is interesting. Deer crossings of the use of these underpasses increased by over 400%, and other mammals increased their use of these underpasses by almost 200%, like that bear we just saw. And let's talk about costs. So if you remember from the previous slide, it's around $41,000 in state and personal costs for each deer vehicle conflict. So pretty much this exclusionary fencing that got added to these existing underpasses that were actually previously used for cattle, it actually paid for itself in under 2 years. So because of the high cost of this issue, pretty much this infrastructure pays for itself very quickly. So that was the wildlife vehicle conflict in terms of terrestrial wildlife in conflict with our cars and our roads. So let's talk about also flood resilience and aquatic organism passage, because we do again want to look at this from a biodiversity conservation perspective and also a flood resilience perspective, because it's very relevant. We had two very destructive hurricanes in our region. So when we want to improve the infrastructure and build these, in particular, these underpasses, which is usually what Virginia needs, not so much an overpass, more an underpass, we also want to use these existing stream corridors, because wildlife often use existing stream corridors to move between habitats naturally anyways. So if you build, for instance, a culvert below a road, you want to be able to accommodate both aquatic terrestrial passage and also increased flood resilience. So as you can see here from these two pictures from Trout Unlimited, who does this work frequently, they're showing you some culverts that are pretty ineffective at facilitating aquatic organism passage. As you can see from these two images, a fish can't get past these, let alone really anything smaller. And they also cannot be used by a lot of our terrestrial wildlife that get in conflict with cars, like our deer and bear. Here are just two other examples from Virginia of ineffective culverts that also are not going to be great at helping with the flood resilience of that road, because a lot of the times these culverts get debris stuck in the front of them from major flooding events, which cause clogging, which causes the flooding. So we don't really love these. So what we want is we want something called stream simulation. And this is from Trout Unlimited. This is what they redo culverts all over the United States. And this is primarily the method that they use. So you want it to span the stream. You want natural stream banks to allow for that terrestrial wildlife passage. You want it to mimic the stream itself, its velocity, its depth for that aquatic passage. And you want it to be pretty wide and have natural substrate, again, to facilitate that wildlife passage, but also increase the flood resilience, make it larger and wider. So as you can see, this is from a hurricane, and it has that increased flood resilience. So the road does not flood. And actually, some interesting statistics from Trout Unlimited. They did a study after Hurricane Irene in Vermont, and 83 traditional culverts failed during the hurricane due to flooding, and 0 stream simulation culverts failed. So very, very effective at helping with that hurricane resilience. So again, let's look at the numbers on here. So if you remember from our previous slide, a deer vehicle collision is around $41,000 in state and personal costs. We have around 60,000 crashes in Virginia alone each year. Wild number. And this chart that you're seeing here on the right is provided for you in that one pager I mentioned. So if you want to look at it again and use these numbers in the future when talking to your legislators, please go ahead. These do come from our Virginia Transportation Research Council as well. So these are the average costs of building an underpass, expanding a culvert, putting in exclusionary fencing, putting in an overpass. So obviously they increase in amounts, but there are a lot of really wonderful federal funding options out there for projects just like this. So I think a lot of our projects in Virginia would qualify for that federal funding, and we would only have to provide that 20% state match. So having some state seed money would go a very long way at increasing the flood resilience and increasing wildlife passage safely across our roads in Virginia. For instance, if we got $2 million in state seed money, we could provide 20 plus miles of exclusionary fencing across Virginia. That would do an amazing job at preventing wildlife vehicle conflict. The one on I-64 was only 1 mile, so it's pretty, it would do a lot of good work with not that much money. And as you can see from our previous slides, it also pays for itself in a short amount of time. And this crossing you see right here is their only wildlife crossing, the only crossing built for wildlife, both aquatic and terrestrial passage in Virginia, with exclusionary fencing. And this is right outside of Fort Belvoir. So we're going to talk a lot about this at the end during our How Do You Engage with Your Legislators section, but this is a map created by Wildlands Network with some input from Wild Virginia. And what it includes is data on high wildlife vehicle conflict in purple, high wildlife biodiversity movement in green, and high social vulnerability plus high flood risk in orange. So as you can see, there are a lot of areas in Virginia where all 4 of these issues overlap. So biodiversity conservation in green, wildlife conflict in purple, and then flooding and social vulnerability in orange. So a underpass that kind of facilitates all of these issues would be extremely helpful in the regions just like this. So we're going to show you at the end of this section how you use this map to engage with legislators and show them that your district looks like this and would benefit from these really great improved underpasses. So Pat, I'm going to hand it over to you. This is Pat Calvert from the Virginia Conservation Network. Take it away, Pat.
Hey, thank y'all for having me. So it's been my pleasure to work with Dr. Jessica and Misty Bowes and others on this work for the past several years, to try to get some legislation through, and hopefully to get some funding. I think it's been certainly appreciated all the legislators, particularly Senator Marsden, on all of this. At the same time, I've heard some stories from legislators about all kinds of issues. And I know that one delegate had 2 cars out at the same time not too long ago. I say that Senator Marsden is on, and I'm happy to shut my mouth to let the senator speak while we got him.
Awesome. Yes, let's take it back to that slide. Thank you for letting me know of that, Pat. I will hand it over to Senator Marsden, who is the champion for habitat connectivity, increasing habitat connectivity, reducing wildlife vehicle conflict in Virginia. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Senator Marsden. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And this is one of these things that I think the Commonwealth needs to just get a start on, to combine with federal efforts, federal dollars, put some state dollars into it. I don't know that we'll ever get huge amounts of money to do things on a large scale, but this is an iterative process where we start working on the most problematic areas in the Commonwealth and then showing the data to delegates and senators as to this is how many accidents have been avoided in the Commonwealth that cause property damage, are a threat to human life, and also our wildlife. And so I think everybody's a winner with wildlife crossings. And the question is, how we move it forward and get this whole thing kind of on automatic every year. Where all right, yeah, we put a few $1 million or whatever into this, and we get it started. And after a while, in a good year, you might be able to do more. And it's just a question of getting started. And that's been the hard part, because I think people look at this and they think, well, it's like bailing an ocean out with a bucket. There's so many places, but there are high profile places. And I think I sent to Misty Bowes the email I got from Wildlife with some of the hot spots that they recommend. Have you seen those? Yeah. And so at any rate, so I'll be talking with Louise Lucas. I may have a path to get some money this year. We'll see. And but want to get this thing started, get the fund established. We've got the plan. It doesn't make much sense to have a plan without a fund. And if you have a fund, you need to put some money in it. And I'm hoping this is a year that I can do that. But no promises. But I'll do the best I can. And I think I might have a path to do that with the inner workings of the Senate Finance Committee. But I'll keep you all posted on that. But it's important work that you're doing, and it has worked in other parts of the state so well. And again, the deer are not welcome visitors at my wife's flower garden, and I'm doing well at home to keep my efforts up to date. And at any rate, but thanks for having me on tonight, and thanks for all the good work that all of you are doing. And I talked to Congressman Byer and let him know that I was working on some money for this year.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Senator Marsden. We really
You
appreciate
guys
it.
take care. I gotta run off. I'm at the Senate Finance Retreat and gotta get back to things. But thank you, and we'll be talking.
We will. Thank you so much. Have a
Bye.
good night. Bye. All right. So let's head back to Pat. Thank you, Pat, for letting me know. So take it away, Pat.
Yeah, sure. I'm on here basically. I've been advocating for a lot of the work that Senator Marsden and organizations on here have been doing, and then I was asked after October 18th. I said I think I can provide pretty good testimony now. So it looks like I'll be on YouTube now, from what I just learned, saying how one of the now I've got a story to tell. So on October 18th, I was heading out about dusk to meet a friend outside of town to go hop in a vehicle together and ride to West Virginia to a conference. It was chilly. And sun was just peeking up. And as I'm in Central Virginia, as many of us here know, in the Commonwealth, that's when those chilly mornings in the fall is when the bucks are looking to create their progeny, and find themselves a doe and make little fawns. So they're trotting about, and so I was just had my coffee, didn't spill any coffee, but a buck just kind of was just trotting along right beside the road and right in front of me, and I went skidding off the road. I will say, I can check the box for a conflict. I did not check the box for collision with said deer. However, I did have a collision with a tree. I think the tree is going to make it. I made it, and I'm very fortunate for that. There were other vehicles heading against me on this 2-lane road. That I was like, I can't go that way to avoid this deer, so I'm gonna have to go that way, off road. Did a little off roading in a small car, and the tree won. But I'm fortunate. Had it been a busier time, had it been at night, I believe, and completely dark, I feel like I dodged a bullet here. But on my drive back, I was thinking, I wonder if there were some potential opportunities for, and I say on my ride back in a tow truck, with a very nice tow truck driver. Noticed some really strong opportunities for, gosh, if we just had some fencing here, some deer could have gone and I could have avoided this altogether. Um, and then I will say this: when the emergency staff came to check me just to make sure, said there was, first things they asked me was like, was there any drinking involved? I'm like, well, just this coffee, which I did not spill, but it was 7 a.m. But then the second thing was it a deer? I'm like, how did you know? They're like, well, we've already been to 3 this morning reports. So it's an issue, and particularly certain times of the year, of course. But we've got deer, we've got elk, we've got turkeys, and bear. And other species. It'd be nice to be able to not just those species, but I'd say even some smaller species, to help them get across the road. I'm a fisherman. I'd like to be able to see some of these opportunities happen. So I appreciate the efforts, everybody here. That's my sob story. Good thing I had insurance, and I'm very fortunate to have made it out. But had I decided to turn left into oncoming traffic, I don't, there's a lot of folks coming into town for work. I think it could have been a different story. So I feel fortunate, but also feel like maybe there's an opportunity here. So thanks for letting me chat.
Sorry, my computer wouldn't let me unmute there for a second. Thank you, Pat. Super unfortunate story, and unfortunately very common for the state and the United States in general. So next, we have up the sort of wildlife impact of wildlife vehicle conflict, and we have an amazing speaker here to discuss that very briefly. Dr. Meg Gamage Tucker. She's actually the president of the Wildlife Center of Virginia. And yes, so take it away, Meg. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay. Thank you, Pat, for that story. I actually had an adult deer sitting in the middle of Statler Boulevard by Stanton as I was on my way to work today. So, you know, daily, this is impacting all of us. So I'm new at the Wildlife Center. For those I haven't met, it's an honor to meet you and start working with you. You all know that wildlife corridors are important for so much, you know, so many things. And at the Wildlife Center, we are looking at this as the big picture. Connectivity, biodiversity, mitigating human-wildlife conflict, adapting to climate change, encouraging ecosystem balance, all of those things, because we have to look at the big picture. We get 4,500 animals we're anticipating this year, going up at least 10% a year. So we have to look at that big picture, and all of these are high priorities to us. In my short tenure at the center, I've seen the Commonwealth of Virginia has made such significant progress in developing wildlife corridor legislation. I've had a lot of experience of working with corridors in Africa. So watching this happen in our own backyard is fantastic. To see the enhancement of ecological connectivity and the reduction of wildlife vehicle collections. As was said earlier with the work that Jessica, the Wildlands group, and Environment Virginia are doing, many good outcomes are coming to fruition. However, I think we need to do a lot more. There are opportunities in the current legislative session to focus on enhancement of infrastructure projects that emphasize collaboration between various state agencies and nonprofits. We want to be a partner in all of that. We have data. We have the Wild One system that is used by 80 centers like ours across the country at no charge. We are working on making that data available so that we can help with figuring out exactly where collisions happen, where interfaces between humans and wildlife are impacted, and how we can do that. I need to emphasize to our legislators and partners, all of the organizations like ours in the state are seeing significant growth in patient admissions. Last year, the last several years, we're seeing an average of 10% growth in admissions per year. Many of these are based on interactions in wildlife corridor situations. We need to figure out a way to align with broader conservation strategies and contribute to species preservation and ecological health. What is happening is not just about these charismatic species. We had this year over 270 box turtles admitted to the center, 47% of which were based on vehicle collisions. Over the past 10 years, we've seen almost 1,000. It's a long-lived species, but it's a species that is slow moving. And if we don't find alternatives, not only on major highways, but in other kinds of systems, we are not going to change that impact. So we're not just focusing on charismatic species, bear, fox, deer. We have to pay attention to raptors. Many raptors and avian species are hit by vehicles because they cannot move out of the way. So what are the ways to mitigate their access and ability to traverse spaces? Songbirds, small mammals, reptiles, amphibians, they're all being impacted, and that all affects the ecological health of this environment. We're supportive of initiatives. We want to share data. We're happy to help with fundraising at the federal level to do what we can. Whatever the type of mitigation and support that we can do, whether it's natural, man-made, or stepping stone, landscape, whatever we can do to reduce the impacts of human and wildlife interaction and conflict. We want to work with you, and we're happy to be a resource to share that information as you're having your conversations. We appreciate being involved, and we appreciate all the great work you all do.
Thank you so much, Meg, and right back at you. This was great and helpful information. Thank you so much for being here and helping us with this. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. We're going to continue with the same presentation, but I'm going to have Misty take over. Misty is with Wildlands Network and a key partner in getting more connectivity in Virginia. So take it away, Misty.
All right, are you seeing the right screen? All right, wonderful. Well, I am honored to be here. I'm Misty Bowes. I'm the U.S. Conservation Policy Manager at Wildlands Network. Big fan of Wild Virginia, as many of you know. And I get to talk us through all the momentum that has been built in Virginia over the years. And I just want to highlight a few things. There's been a lot going on, but some of the key moments that have really built us up to the place we're at now and the sort of legislation we're thinking about next year. So just to start off, for those of you that don't know, back in 2018, Virginians came together and started the Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative. Wild Virginia had a big role in that. The Virginia Transportation Research Council had a big role, but it really just was some folks who were like, hey, we are one of the worst states in the nation for wildlife vehicle collisions. What can we do about it? And before we knew it, we had a big group. Agencies joined us, nonprofits joined us, folks from the universities came on, citizen scientists. This group just grew very quickly. And before we knew it, we were formally the Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative. And a subset of that group, just very shortly after in 2020, were able to work with Senator Marsden and several other legislators to pass a bill that actually required Virginia to create a wildlife corridor action plan. And that's important because that identifies where the important movement corridors for wildlife are in the state, and also the most important places to put crossings. And that's a big deal because that's something we didn't have, and it's something a lot of states don't have. And that plan was going to take a couple of years to be written, but the legislation to make it happen happened in 2020. And then the very next year, companion legislation was passed by that same group. And that was actually asking state agencies to further incorporate the recommendations that came out of that plan. So again, this bedrock plan leading to even more things. And then last year, the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan was actually completed. We had a first draft that came out. It was great. And VDOT was actually awarded a grant from the Wildlife Crossings Pilot Program, which is a national grant fund, to make that plan even better and add more considerations and more species to the considerations they're looking at. So that's fantastic. And the plan led to, the plan was the reason we received those funds from the federal government, no doubt about it. So we just keep trying to point that out throughout, that there are funds for this. And if we keep our momentum up, we can access those funds. And then lastly, this year, I'm proud to announce that the wildlife corridors were weighted in the Virginia Land Conservation Grants Foundation, the grant manual, which sounds kind of confusing, but what it means is that wildlife corridors are now a consideration, and one of the reasons you can actually protect land and get more credits essentially for your grant applications through that huge foundation in Virginia. So this is just another example of all the momentum that's built through all of the things we've done. And that's not all, but those are just a few of the cool things I wanted to share. But most importantly, what's next? Where do we want to go from here? We've built all this momentum. We've got all these champions. We have huge bipartisan support in the legislature for this effort. So where do we go now? So this year, what we want to see and what we need your help with tonight to motivate legislators to do this year is to require wildlife crossings to be part of the way we do business when we build or fix roads, rather than an afterthought. And that's where we've been. And that's why we're in the situation we're in. We're thinking of them after we build a road. We need to think of it beforehand. We need to look at that wildlife corridor action plan and say, hey, where are those movement corridors? Where are those hot spots? Where are animals going? And plan for that up front. And so we want to bake that into how we do business in Virginia. And we hope to do that through legislation this year. We also still lack good information, good data on where animals are being hit. We just don't collect it consistently, and we certainly don't collect it statewide, and certainly not for most species. So we'd really like to see through legislation this year that we standardize how we collect our data. And that means we can put crossings in the right places, and we can make them most effective and especially most cost effective as well. And then lastly, we want to support our agencies. We don't want to ask them to do all of this and then not give them any resources to do it. So we're really pushing for, and Senator Marsden talked about this, some funding. You know, even if it's just a little bit, it can help us access federal dollars by match, right? So we just need to get some sort of funding in place to support our agencies and give them the capacity to implement that wildlife corridor action plan, build the crossings that they're talking about in that plan. And we want to see that funding last. We want it to be sustainable over time. So there's a couple resources I want to share with you all tonight. There's just two. And because I know you're all advocates for wildlife crossings and you want to do your best job, and there's two resources that I think can really help you do that. This first one is a report that came out this year. My organization and the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators put this together. It's fantastic, and it looks at all of the legislation across the country where wildlife crossing or corridor legislation has been passed. And so the states that are in blue, they're not blue states, they're just blue. And these are the states where wildlife crossing legislation of some form has been passed. So that means maybe they had a wildlife corridor action plan like we did, or maybe they created a grant fund, but regardless, they passed something. And that's a lot of states. You can see the momentum here. And then the states in orange, those are states that introduced legislation. So if you're in one of those states, I know we have folks from all over the country tonight, you can look at your state, read this report, and find out what that legislation is and help support it. So I really wanted to point that out for folks that are from other places. And then if you happen to be from a gray state, that means there's no introduced legislation yet. And so I consider that a challenge. I say, hey, great, use this report, look at what other states are doing, reach out to folks like us who work across the country, and let's get stuff moving in your state, because this is clearly the direction the country's going, and we just need to all help each other get there. So State of the States, we'll send that in the follow-up email. And then there's one other report I want to draw your attention to. This came out this year as well, and it's the Wildlife Infrastructure Funding Guide. And what this is all of the federal dollars that are available for wildlife crossings. And there's a lot of them. Here's just one example. So the Wildlife Crossings Pilot Program that VDOT was able to access here in Virginia, which is great. It's just one of the many federal programs out there. It was giving $350 million over 5 years to help states just like Virginia plan for and build wildlife crossings. But it's not the only one. There's so many more other programs that include funding for wildlife crossings of all stripes, whether it's climate resilience, flood resilience, just wildlife crossings, or planning for corridors. So I would encourage you to, first of all, know that this is here and let your legislators know there's money on the table that we can access right now. So I don't want anyone to leave without a link to this one as well, because I think these two reports really can make a big difference. And then I want to leave us with this. This is my challenge for all of us. The question is, why aren't more wildlife crossings being built? We know they work. We know they pay for themselves in a few years. We know people love them. Why aren't there more of them? And so recently there was a big survey of over 500 transportation engineers across the country. And they asked them this question. They said, why aren't more wildlife crossings being built? If everyone, thinks they're a great idea and they seem to work, the science is there. And three things really bubbled to the top in their answers. The first is there's no money. And that's why you'll see in our ask this year, we're asking for funds, right? We need capacity to do this stuff. The second makes sense, same thing, not good data. Just like we're asking for again this year, there's not consistently collected data, and it's not in the hands of folks that need it and need to use it, like transportation engineers. But the one that really gets me, and this is what I want to leave us with, is they're not convinced that we would support crossings. And that makes me crazy, because we know that the public supports crossings. But if that's still what folks think in the agencies, then that's our job. That's our call to action, if you will, because people want crossings. We know they do. And so let's work together to make sure that that is heard loud and clear. And so I hope you all will stay for the second part of the session, where we're going to dig into how you can make your voice heard and really advocate for wildlife crossings. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Misty. So real fast, let's look at some of the polling questions. So it looks like for our poll, thank you so much if you answered the provided poll. So just to kind of hook on to what Misty was saying before about motivation to get money and funds and resources for these issues and topics and for crossings in general. So what about wildlife crossing interests you the most? So it looks like for the most part, we have lots of conservationists in this audience. Protecting wildlife and biodiversity was the top choice selected, and the second choice selected was human safety and reducing wildlife vehicle collisions. So not a surprise there as the top two choices of why we want this, but also climate and flood resilience and mitigation and economic benefits, of course. So those were the third and fourth selected answer respectively. So it looks like you're all very much in line with the reasons why we're gonna try to put these better infrastructure in place. And this is something when we're gonna introduce you to our sample letter to your rep, something that you can mention to them of why this issue is important to you is very important to them as well. And then the second question, what do you think is the most significant barrier to expanding wildlife crossing initiatives in Virginia? Looks like the top reported answer was lack of funding and resources, for sure. The second answer was lack of public awareness and support. So it looks like everybody kind of knew this fact that there's a lack of public awareness around this issue. So that is an interesting response for sure. And we would love to hand it over to you to at your holiday parties this year to please bring up this topic. And then the last two that people selected was limited data on where to build crossings. And then the last one was lack of crossing design guidelines. So very fascinating choices, but looks like you guys kind of already knew a lot of this. So please tell your neighbors and your friends. And then it looks like for the last question, have you gotten into a car accident involving wildlife in Virginia? It looks like about 40% of you said yes. So a bit staggering of a statistic, but also not surprising due to that we are top 10 in the nation for wildlife vehicle conflict. So all really fascinating answers and something that we're going to also keep in mind in the future when we're advocating for crossings, to know that the wildlife and biodiversity and driver safety are very important to you, and to look for those resources to put these structures in place. So thank you so much. Okay. Let's see. So we have both of our emails. Oops, sorry. Oh, we're up. So we'll put them in the follow-up email as well. Please do email Misty or I if you have any questions on this topic or you'd like to get involved more. Also in the one-pager we provided to you in the chat, and we will also provide in the follow-up email, has the QR code to our Virginia Conservation Network paper, which outlines this issue in greater detail. So it looks like we are right on track, and we are going to, before we go into the section on how you engage with your legislator, we are going to answer some questions. So does anybody have any general questions on this topic? Please do put them in the Q&A section. So we do have one. And it is, has the insurance industry been engaged? We get this question a lot. I have had 4 deer collisions in the past 3 years, totaled 1 car and did plenty of vehicle damage the other 3 times. I would think that insurers would be all over this. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry for all your wildlife vehicle conflict. Misty, you're probably better apt at answering this question.
Yeah, very timely. I was just in a meeting with legislators in Maryland today, talking about this very issue, and they've been working really closely with the insurance companies there. And the legislature there actually asked them to make a report and say, okay, well, are you passing along the cost of all of these crashes to your constituent, right? To your customers? And so they're in the process of finalizing that report, and they gave us the initial results today. But the first thing they found is that the cost of crashes are increasing dramatically every year for kind of 2 reasons. One, there's just, more vehicle conflicts with deer generally, but also there's just older cars on the road that are just more expensive and sustain more damage typically in an accident. So it's already costing them more money than they expected just from this initial report. And we expect to see that, yes, those costs are probably getting passed on to the customer, but in a few months, we should be able to quantify what that is. And that will help us make the case, I think, to insurance companies about why we need to team up on this issue and not see each other as, you know, adversaries, but allies. We can save everyone money. We can save them the hassle and the time, and save people and their customers money.
Thank you, Misty. All right. And next question is from Joe. Where to find data on car animal collisions, police reports, insurance company reports, other public databases? So that is a great question. And Kylie, could you actually put in the chat the Habitat Connectivity Hub link? Thank you. So that is an excellent question, and we're going to put a link in the chat to Virginia's Habitat Connectivity Hub, which outlines where all of the data that we use comes from and how we're trying to expand on that data. So for Virginia's current Wildlife Corridor Action Plan, our state agency used police report data. But unfortunately, our Virginia Transportation Research Council found that police report data underreports wildlife vehicle collisions by 5 to 9 times, which is pretty significant. And it mainly only includes large mammals, so deer and black bear. So that's understandable, but it's missing that biodiversity aspect. And also people swerve for all sizes of wildlife and can get into crashes from all sizes of wildlife. So we're sort of missing quite a significant amount of data. The part of the legislation that Misty mentioned was to expand. VDOT has a contractor carcass removal app where they basically check off on a map where they remove a carcass and what species they removed from the highway, which we are predicting will better identify where wildlife vehicle hotspots are in Virginia, so we can put a crossing there. We also are in the midst of, and Meg from the Wildlife Center of Virginia mentioned this briefly, they have amazing databases from wildlife rehabilitation data, which really fills in the gap of that biodiversity aspect in terms of wildlife vehicle conflict. And so we're trying out a pilot program right now using Wildlife Center data on where animals are getting into crashes, because they do, when you submit an animal, if you're bringing in an animal for wildlife rehab, they do ask for location data. So we're trying to see if we can use that data to fill in those gaps. And so police reports, carcass removal data, and wildlife rehab data are the top forms of data that are being used right now. But great question. Okay. And then, so for Maribel, hi Maribel. Next question is law enforcement a supporter as well? That's interesting. Misty, do you have an answer to that? Because I don't know if I have an answer to that.
About that. So, you know, most agencies have, you know, while they can't take a position on legislation, have been very supportive of, you know, what we're trying to do. And that includes, you know, folks who are in law enforcement, because they're the ones out there who, like Pat was saying, right? They've been out to 3 calls that morning trying to help folks that have been in crashes. I have not, off the top of my head, seen an example of where they've taken a position, but that's not unusual for an agency either. But I could definitely see that being beneficial. I have seen cases where you can help pay for crossings by having a sort of a toll, if you say near the crossing itself, or having some sort of a fee if you get a speeding ticket near that crossing, and using that money to then pay for the infrastructure that's needed. So law enforcement has a role there to play. So I suppose they would like that. They're getting more revenue, but I have not actually seen like an official statement from any police department.
I hadn't seen a statement, but I can tell that it's a sink of agency resources and time where they could be better used on potentially other things. If it's avoidable, I would think it would be something they'd not like to have to necessarily deal with, but they also seem like it was fairly routine in that it's like, oh, another deer hit. Yep. All right. You okay? You all right? Okay. Yeah. Sorry about your car, bud.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions?
I saw one in the chat that I wanted to answer if I could. Someone had asked about the license plate program that some states use, and there is a good example of that in Oregon. It's called the Watch for Wildlife license plate. and they use the revenues from that license plate that folks can choose when they get their license plate, and they use that to help fund wildlife crossings out there. So that's a pretty cool opportunity. It's called the Watch for Wildlife license plate program.
Awesome. Thank you for catching that. Does anybody else have any other? Oh, here we go. We have another question. Sorry if this was covered already, but why do legislators think the public doesn't care? Um, that's an interesting question, and probably a multi-layered answer to that. I think potentially because there are a lot of other issues out there, and there are a lot of other legislative priorities out there potentially, and that I think just in general, before Wild Virginia created a habitat connectivity program where habitat connectivity is becoming kind of like a buzzword in conservation right now. And I think there's a lot more movement building on it in general across the country and world. And so I think right now we're sort of seeing just an uptick in interest in the topic in general. And I think before, legislators were just not seeing any interest. They were seeing interest in just maybe blanket habitat conservation, something like that. But Misty, do you have an answer to that one?
Yeah, and what I was referencing was a report that was over 500 Department of Transportation professionals who were asked, they didn't think that the public would support them if they built wildlife crossings. So that's what I was referencing. But no, what I found talking to legislators is that, boy, just like Pat was saying, we've all had that experience. Like over almost half of you have hit an animal, right? So, I mean, I think people understand this is a very personal issue. It's something that happens to almost everyone, if not to them, someone they know. And I think, maybe it just hasn't been brought to their attention that there's a solution. So I think that's part of our challenge, all of us out here who are advocating for wildlife crossings, to make sure legislators know this is top of mind for us, and help remind them of the maybe encounters they and their family and friends have had.
Great, thank you. We got another one. Let's see. Should we say that we would approve funding for these projects? So yes, so that is something that we have been advocating for a really long time. Last year, we wanted to potentially get a state wildlife corridor grant fund put in place, which would allow to accumulate funds from the state, but also from private donors. And that would be a long-term solution. But it's a bit difficult right now because we have a very tight budget in Virginia. So what we are asking for potentially instead this year is legislation requiring our state agencies to think of and find long-term funding sources themselves. So that is something we would like to have, is long-term funding. Where it comes from, we're a little bit more flexible on, but we would love state seed money. We would also love to gather private donations for these types of projects. But yeah, at the end of the day, it would just be good to have state agency personnel that support these projects, and it's their job to do this because that's something that's a huge barrier to getting these projects in place, but resources for our state agencies to be able to do this. Let's see, I think we have some in the chat. Let's see here. Okay, number of human injuries and deaths as a result of collisions. So that's a great question. The Department of Motor Vehicles obviously has that data, and that's where a lot of our data comes from. Again, you do have to remember that this comes mainly from police report data, and that's underreporting the issue. But we do have that data. You can actually, it's public. You can go to the DMV website and you can search for your county, and it will actually list the number of injuries and crashes and deaths from wildlife vehicle conflict. So the deaths is actually pretty low, thank goodness, from wildlife vehicle conflict, but the number of injury and crashes is very high. Currently, right now, Loudoun County is top in the state for crashes with wildlife, according to police report data. But yeah, I can try to find that and I can put that in the follow-up email.
Yeah, and I've got them right here. Typically, every year there's about 1 to 2 million wildlife vehicle collisions that cost about 200 human lives, about 350 million vertebrate animal lives, and the whole thing costs about $10 billion. So those are just a couple quick.
And let's do this question from Julie. Has anyone looked at the funding model being used in Canada? They have over and underpasses every few miles, and they're gorgeous and functional. So what I know about it is I think they have over 20 overpasses and underpasses along one of their major highways. And actually, the research that I read on it is very similar to the research that our research council did along I-64, where I showed you that it reduces with exclusionary fencing on underpasses, reduces that conflict by over 96%. Canada actually saw similar numbers, which is pretty telling that it's consistent across projects. But in terms of funding model, I have not looked into that so much. Do you know more about that, Misty?
I just know in particular, strong government support has been key. And I know that they allocated over $400 million to work on that project specifically. So, big shout out to the Canadian government on that one.
Yeah, at the end of the day, government support helps these projects. But to give you a little bit of hope in the aspects of private funding, the large crossing overpass project in California, that's going over like that 10-lane highway. It's a $96 million project or something. It might even be more these days. I think about a third of it is paid for via private funds. So there are quite a lot of private funding avenues to take as well. Any other questions? I think we're just about to our next, let's do this. Yeah, naming the overpasses may help donors as well. Yeah, that's definitely something we think about too, for sure. If you'd love to put your name on the underpass or overpass, let us know. I think we need to go into our next section. We will have more time for questions at the end of the next one. But first, Pat and Meg, you don't have to be here for this last section. This is just, unless you want to, this is just training folks on how to engage with their legislators. Feel free to stick around, but I do encourage everyone in the chat, please do thank our two guest speakers, Pat and Meg, and Misty's hanging on with me for the last section as well. But thank you so
all
much.
for including us. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. So if you'd like to engage with your legislators, we're going to do a session now. We're going to show you a sample letter to your legislators. We're also going to show you how to use a map with all of this data on it as a tool for advocacy and lobbying. So please do stick around if you want more information on how to engage with your legislators. But thank you so much. All right. Okay, so I am going to hand it over to, we have two of our really lovely Wild Virginia interns here, Quintessa and Darby. So Quintessa is going to outline our sample letter to legislators. We're going to put those links in the chat for you. We're also, again, going to put them in the follow-up email afterwards. So let me share my screen real fast to show you the sample letter. Oops. Wrong one. There we go. Okie dokie. So like I said, that letter is now in the chat so you can follow along. It is view only, so you're not able to edit it directly. So what you're going to have to do is you're actually going to have to copy it and paste it to another document where you can edit it yourself, because we just can't have so many people editing the same doc, because then the letter will change completely. So again, if you want to use this for your own personal use, please do copy and paste the language into a separate document so that you can edit it and put in your own personal information. And just to explain this to you, Quintessa is going to go over the basics of this, but this is your letter to your legislator. So please do edit it based off of what you need. So take it from here, Quintessa. Thank you so much.
Of course. Well, hi, I'm Quintessa, and I'm just going to go over the important parts of the letter that needed to be highlighted. So first you'll see like just your address, city, state, and zip code and date. And also the subject, which the letter is basically about support for wildlife crossing and legislation to improve infrastructure resilience. And the big part of this letter is to make sure that you say you're a constituent of your district and also having your representative's name, which can be found through the link to the map, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So in that little paragraph where it says constituent of your district, just like 3 main points that are bolded that are we're trying to get across to representatives and legislators, which is proven solutions for reducing wildlife vehicle conflicts. And Virginia is currently ranking in wildlife vehicle conflicts, which is very important for legislators to know about so they can feel more inclined to address these problems. So in the next part, you'll see that there's an optional section about, sorry. So in that next part that's highlighted, my apologies, I skipped right over it. There's going to be a link to an interactive map, which will show you districts that will be better off with infrastructure to help wildlife communities and protect communities from flooding and stuff like that. And next is by supporting this wildlife crossing. So in this section, there's a small little red text about adding in a personal story about wildlife vehicle conflict or flooding, which can persuade your legislator to feel more closer to you and have an understanding of what it feels like to be on these roads nowadays. And that it is very common to have an incident where a wildlife animal can get hurt. So that's a very important part that if you feel inclined to, it would help adding a personal story. Then next is a couple more of the main points that we urge legislators to understand about why we need support for these legislations is requiring state agencies to include wildlife passages and enhancing VDOT's data collection efforts, and also establishing sustainable funding and mechanisms for connectivity projects. And as you see, going up next is making sure you thank your legislators for, oh my God, my apologies. Make sure to thank your legislators and put in your name and saying sincerely and your contact information so they can get back in contact with you if they have any further questions. Could you go to the next page, please? Thank you. So here's the map is for the House district, and it's for 30, and it basically just highlights. It basically highlights the districts that will benefit from wildlife crossings, what I said earlier, which Darby will walk you through in just a little bit. But yeah, and thank you guys.
Thank you, Quintessa. All
Okay.
right. Thank you so much. Okay, so that is for your use. Like I said, you have that link now, or we're also going to include this link to the letter in the follow-up email. Please do, again, you're going to copy and paste this language to your own so you can edit it for your own use. And so again, this is just a sample template letter, what's effective in terms of engaging with your legislator. And just keep in mind that it really is going to come, we hope that it comes from you and comes from your heart and your experiences in your district to engage that legislator. That's what makes it really effective. But also really good to keep in mind the 3 types of legislation that we are asking for. So great job. And then the second page, so we're going to now share with you in the chat a map that Wildlands Network has made, and Darby, our other intern, is going to share with you also in the chat a step-by-step document how you can use this map to engage with your legislature. And we do recommend that you sort of detail. It's going to look different for each one of these districts depending on, the amount of wildlife vehicle conflict, the amount of biodiversity, the amount of flooding risk. So please do keep that in mind. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and the map is now in the chat, and I'm going to hand it over to Darby. We're also going to put a link to the instructions in the chat as well, but Darby is also going to share her screen and show you the step-by-step instructions on how to use this map for advocacy. So take it away, Darby. Thank you.
Thank you. Just gotta share my screen. So this is the instructions for that map that you just received. But before we even get to the map, we're going to start with this fun website called Who's My Legislator? Most of you probably know, but if you don't, this is super helpful to get to know what district you're in and also who your representatives are. And so just as a basic for this whole instruction sheet, these arrows basically show anywhere you want to click, and the circled information is just more helpful information for the instructions. So this is the link that you want to go to confirm or maybe to find out for the first time who your legislator is. And you're just going to put your address right into this little box and then click Find Now. And then you're going to get a screen that looks exactly like this, but obviously not Charlottesville, unless you're from Charlottesville, which hi, if you are. But we are focusing only on these state representatives. And so this is a more zoomed in picture of that. Again, I specifically chose Charlottesville for this example. So just like keep in mind these names and these district numbers that you can then confirm on your map. And so then going to the map, if you click on this link, or if you already go to the link that was sent in the chat, this is the page that you'll be brought to. I would just like to say that if you want to play around on this website at all, I think it's really fun. It shows you some great information. But for what we're getting into today, you'll notice this legend on the left-hand side, and it just explains what each of these are. So in purple, we have the high-risk wildlife conflict areas. In light green, we have wildlife biodiversity resilience corridors. And in dark green, we have buffers. Sorry, wrong. Light green is buffers and dark green is corridors. And then areas with moderate to very high social vulnerability and flood risk is in orange. And so then just zooming in on this circled area, you have a layer symbol. And if you click on that, you'll see this screen, which gives you all the options for other things that you can view. And for right now, we're gonna hide all of the layers. So if you kind of just hover your mouse over all of these arrows, an eye symbol will pop up. And if you click on all of those, you will just get a blank map of Virginia. And then we're going to start out for this demonstration with the House districts, but you can come back to this step and fill it out for the Senate districts as well. And so you just click this little eye symbol and this will pop up. And so then you can confirm with your previous link where your district is and what number it is, and use this little zoom in button to get closer to it, which I did here again on Charlottesville. And then now you want to get set up for the screenshot that you're going to be sharing with your legislator in your email. So you are going to re-click all of these, which is going to pop them all back up, or you can do one at a time if you so please. And then this is sort of what you're going to get to screenshot. And just to point out here, Charlottesville clearly has a lot of wildlife vehicle conflict and not so much the other things, but it's still important as an advocacy tool to share with your state delegates, even if they don't overlap. But if they do overlap, that's even more reason to show them this information. And then for screenshots, I feel like I forget how to take a screenshot every time I have to take one on my computer. So this is specifically for the Mac, and PC will be next. You press Shift, Command, and 5 all at the same time, and this box is gonna pop up. For this specific instance, you wanna click this little box right here, which is basically just gonna allow you to pick a certain region of your screen, and then you can adjust the box just like how you would crop a picture, and just put it over the map. And then you're going to press Options, and a drop-down menu is going to come down, and you can choose where you would like to save your screenshot, so the file location. And then once you've done those steps, you can click Capture, and your screenshot will be saved in that file location so you can find it later. And then on a PC, you go to the Search tab at the bottom of the toolbar and search Snipping Tool. And then inside of it, this is what it looks like. And you're going to click New, this little plus sign. And then that will appear outside the area to take a screenshot of. And then you just go ahead and insert that in your letter. And then once again, if you want to do this for the Senate districts, you go right back up to this step and click on this little tab instead. So now I'm going to unshare my screen.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Darby. That was super helpful. So once again, we are going to provide those instructions in the follow-up email for you. So you have these steps and instructions on how to use this. And I just wanted to I'm going to share my screen again to show you the actual map itself. Hold on real fast. And then we will take questions. So we did again put the link to the map in the chat, but again, it will be in the follow-up email, but this is what it looks like. And I just want to reiterate that the main priority that legislators are probably going to look for is wildlife vehicle conflict. So let's do House districts real fast. Computer's going to be a tad slow. There we go. Zoom in here and then add our high wildlife vehicle conflict. So like we said, you tailor your letter to your area and the issues that you are concerned about. So for instance, let's look at this House District 53 right here. We're seeing a lot of high wildlife vehicle conflict. So you can simply take a screenshot of your district just showing the wildlife vehicle conflict, but then you can also add in your biodiversity resilience quarter. So particularly for this district, we have high biodiversity movement here in this green. And then we also can overlay these orange parts are high flood risk and high social vulnerability. So areas where the communities are more vulnerable to natural disasters like hurricanes. So in particular, this District 53 has lots of areas that overlap with all of these topics. So it's a great way to engage with your legislators and show proof that we need better infrastructure for these issues. But again, really you can focus on whichever topics suit you, and you can include more images or less images. This is simply a tool for you to engage with your legislators and show them the issue throughout Virginia and the places that you live. So, okay, before we end the webinar tonight, we wanted to make sure if you have any questions in general about any of this topic, or if you have any questions on the letter and the mapping tool, please do let us know now. Okay. Yes, we will provide the link to the DMV collision data. I can find that link and get it for you. And I'll provide that in the follow-up email. Any other questions on the letter? We will provide the letter via the Google Doc, but we'll also provide it as a Word document in the follow-up email as well for those who just simply want to work from a Word document.
And I just realized maybe we didn't mention, but the General Assembly kicks off early January. So this is a great time to reach out to legislators, make sure this is top of mind right before they hit the holidays, and have plenty of time to read your letter and look at your map before they head back to session.
Thank you, Misty. Yes, very important information to include. Does anybody have any other questions? We're a little bit early, but I think it's okay. Again, we're going to provide this recording to you and all of the resources that we mentioned. And please do reach out to Misty and I with any questions you have throughout the General Assembly. We're here to help you. This is what we do. Thank you so much. If you don't have any questions, I'd say thank you for being here. And thank you so much to all of our wonderful speakers. Thank you, Misty, and thank you, Darby and Quintessa, for helping us out with engaging with you all. It's been super fabulous. Thank you, everyone.